By the early 2000s, Rayman was proving to be rather lucrative for Ubisoft. Rayman 1 and 2 were huge successes, and Rayman Arena saw some mild success as well, so by now it was finally time to make the third game in the series, right? And so they did, but with a notable exclusion. You see, Michel Ancel had different things on his mind. Specifically, his next big project after Rayman 2 would be a game called Beyond Good and Evil. While he was busy with that, Ubisoft decided to start development on Rayman 3 without him, although Ancel had a very small part in the game's production, attending brainstorming sessions and creating Rayman's redesign, which would become the standard design used throughout the remainder of Rayman's history. Ancel was proud of the team for making a Rayman game without his help, but noted that he would have made the game very differently if he was in charge. The game saw its initial release for Nintendo GameCube on February 21st, 2003, March 4th, 2003 on PlayStation 2 and Xbox, and March 18th, 2003 for Windows. The version this video is based on is the remastered version, Rayman 3 HD, which was released on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 through these systems' respective digital storefronts in the spring of 2012. While it isn't the focus of this video, it also received a handheld adaptation, releasing for Game Boy Advance alongside the GameCube release on February 21st, 2003, on J2ME phone sometime in 2004, and, get this, the Nokia N-Gage, yes, that's N-Gage, on December 11th, 2003. This port is a strange case, as it takes far more elements from Rayman 2 than it does from Rayman 3, even leading to speculation among fans that it was initially a Game Boy Advance version of Rayman 2. I may look at this one later on provided there's demand for it, but today we're focusing strictly on the console game. While the game wasn't as big of a hit as its predecessor, it was still received generally positive by the press and fans alike. Rayman 3 has by far one of the strangest video game plots I've seen. One day, a black glum with ambitions to take over the world named Andre starts an army of mercenaries called Hoodlums. He then sends them out to wreak havoc on the Glade, giving chase to Murphy, who, in an attempt to wake up Rayman, accidentally drops his hands and has to carry him by his hair. After helping him pick up some red lums, Murphy gets Rayman up to speed by pulling out the game's manual in-universe and berating the manual as he reads from it. This is already surreal. After learning the basic controls, you meet up with Globox and get your hands back, allowing you to punch once again. You chase Andre through the rest of the Fairy Council, receiving some of the snarkiest tutorials in video game history, and meet up with him at certain points before he runs off again. Eventually, Andre corners Globox, and in his infinite wisdom, Globox accidentally swallows Andre whole. This is about as normal as this game gets. You arrive at the heart of the world, basically the core of the universe that keeps everything in balance. The Great Protoon comes to mind. Here, the teens tell you to get Globox to a doctor in the Clearleaf Forest, but not before you say goodbye to Murphy, because you're not seeing him for the entire game. After you clear out the Clearleaf Forest, pun entirely intended, you take Globox to the doctor, who tells you to see the other doctors because he can't cure Globox alone. Because of course he can't cure Globox alone, are you stupid? You eventually meet up with all three doctors, who perform a jam session on Globox and release Andre from his stomach. Andre, now free, meets up with Reflux, the leader of the Canaran that you defeat earlier in the game, and forms a truce with him to take over the world. He steals the Scepter of Leptis and uses it to gain immense power, and it's now up to Rayman to follow him up the tower and take the powered-up Reflux down, save the world, and fall back asleep until the plot needs him again. Overall, Rayman 3's story is just kind of there. It's obviously not the main focus of a game like this, but the story here feels really slapped together and doesn't make enough sense to be engaging. The humor kind of falls flat most of the time too. There were a few jokes that got a good chuckle out of me, but most of the jokes are either juvenile or just don't land at all. Maybe it's just me, but this game is just really unfunny. I like the more Saturday morning cartoon vibe they were going for here, but it just isn't written well enough for me to care. On the plus side though, the voice acting is pretty good, especially for a game this old. Moving over to the presentation side, the game's visuals are pretty nice. The models are very appealing and still look great after more than a decade and a half, and the world design is something I'm super into. The organic features of Rayman's world blend with the handcrafted look of the Hoodlum structures to craft a unique, engaging visual style. The textures are clean, the visual effects are nice, the lighting looks good, and overall, even on older platforms, Rayman 3 is a visual treat. The music takes on a similar middle ground vibe as the story, with both atmospheric stuff for the more grounded environments and funkier tunes for the zany stuff, like fighting a cross-stitch wizard. The sound effects are worth mentioning as well. There are a lot of appealing sounds for picking up gems and hitting enemies that just makes these things more satisfying to do, and the game overall just looks and sounds spectacular. A series standard for Rayman. The gameplay takes a similar middle ground approach, like a more linear version of Rayman 2's gameplay. You'll be making your way from area to area, fighting enemies and tackling platforming sections along the way. As you make your way to the next area, there's still a ton of hidden stuff to discover, making exploring still a rewarding, satisfying endeavor for the curious gamer. The series staple of breakable cages once again returns, this time containing teensy wizards. When you fill up this medallion, you get an upgrade to your total HP. Instead of a set amount of collectibles in an area, Hoodlum Havoc operates on an arcade-style score system. Almost everything you do in the game will score you points, which can be comboed by doing these actions in quick succession, with all of these points being added onto your total score. These are tallied up at the end of an area grade between 1 to 5 stars, and leading to a new minigame unlock when you reach certain score thresholds. The minigames are fine, fun distractions, but not anything really worth going back to multiple times. Still, the score system adds a ton of replayability to the game, alongside an addictive arcade aspect that rewards skilled play. Combat has also seen quite the facelift. Instead of the easy enemy bouts of Rayman 2, Hoodlum Havoc's combat will have you jumping to avoid shots and learning to whittle past enemy defenses by curving your punches to the left or right. I really like this combat system. While things can get mildly annoying when there's a ton of enemies in one place, I actually had fun and felt challenged while fighting. Also new to the game are laser detergent cans, which give Rayman combat fatigues.
Combat fatigues!
These allow you to use one of 5 different power-ups. The green can grants you access to the vortex, which can spin platforms around and make enemies smaller and easier to take out. Next is the red can, which bestows upon you the heavy metal fists. More or less a souped up version of your normal punch. It can destroy things you normally can't and take the weaker enemies out in one hit. The blue can gives you the lockjaw, which can allow you to swing from hooks, another Rayman series staple, and attach your claws to foes, electrocuting them for easy takedowns. The orange can contains the shock rocket, which you can use to take out targets from a long distance. And finally, the yellow can will let you use the throttle copter, which lets you fly for all of 5 seconds before it runs out of juice. While they can feel situational at best at times, they do a good job at spicing things up. There are also a few sections that completely change the way you play. The Land of the Living Dead has water to swim in, although it's a bit strange that there's only one part where you go underwater in the whole game. The Summit Beyond the Clouds features a snowboard race against the frozen Globox. The Desert of the Canaran has stealth elements. The Tower of Olympus has this ship called the Armageddon, and there are a few segments sprinkled throughout the game where Rayman shrinks down super small and rides around in his shoe, chasing his other shoe down. A few of these are good, like the swimming part is enjoyable just due to how well Rayman controls underwater, and snowboarding sections are always neat to see in platformers, so I welcome this with open arms, but there were a few I didn't like flying the Armageddon in the Tower of the Leptis, just because of how strange the controls for this thing are. And while the situation you're in is pretty funny, chasing down your other shoe isn't all that engaging. Still, most of the game is focused on top-notch platforming and action, so I'm not gonna get too mad about these parts. The bosses are one of the game's weaker aspects. On the whole, they're fine, they do the job well, but they're not all that memorable. The Hood Stomper is annoying to take out, Begoniax is mostly about running around in circles, Razoff is more of a stealth section than a boss fight, and the less said about the horrible machine, the better. Both of the battles against Reflux were pretty good though. Like, they're not bad fights, Hood Stomper and the horrible machine aside, but they're mostly forgettable. It's probably just a me thing again. They are better than Rayman 2's bosses though, although that's really not a high bar to beat. Overall, I'd say Rayman 3 plays quite well. There are a few annoying parts, but they don't last all that long, and soon enough you're going to find yourself in a large battle with some enemies or a good old-fashioned obstacle course to test your platforming skills. And the platforming is great! It has the perfect amount of challenge and tests your skills well. It's fun, it's polished, it's well designed, and plays great. It's really enjoyable to go through these levels. Rayman 3 is a good platformer and a good beat 'em up, despite some frustrations with minigames and alternate gameplay styles. Overall, I'd say Rayman's Third Adventure is a great game. It's a rock-solid 3D action platformer with great visual design, memorable music, enjoyable mechanics, interesting power-ups, and great level design. It does some interesting new things to the series, and for a game like this, there's not much more I can ask for. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that I like this one more than Rayman 2, just because I find the gameplay more enjoyable than that of Rayman 2. That's not to say 2 is bad, far from, but I overall prefer 3. It may have its issues, like how the humor and writing falls flat most of the time, and a few sections that aren't so great. But the rest of the game is at that consistent level of engaging platforming and fun combat that it's not that huge of a problem. That's why I'm giving Rayman 3 Hoodlum Havoc a 9 out of 10 and a silver award. So that was my review on Rayman 3 Hoodlum Havoc. Overall, a great game, and something I consider somewhat of a classic that's worth playing to any platforming fan or Rayman fan. Next time on the Rayman Retrospective, we'll be skipping past the 8-year hiatus the main series took, and we'll be diving straight into the series' short-lived renaissance with 2011's Rayman Origins. Until next time, this has been blueblur98, signing off. See you next time.